Hey everyone, it's Jalian. The pandemic poses challenges to people who are unhoused, as they must find ways to keep themselves and their loved ones safe with limited access to running water, hand sanitizer, and masks. In the absence of shelter, the CDC recommends that local officials allow people who are living unsheltered or in encampments to remain where they are, because clearing encampments can spread the virus by causing people to disperse throughout the community, and it can break connections with the service providers who care for them. That's why in St. Louis, advocates for those who are unhoused have been stepping up to distribute masks and hand sanitizer, educate about how to prevent the spread, and help people file paperwork for their COVID-19 stimulus check. They've also supported the creation of tent encampments that allow people who are unhoused to remain spaced apart and access education, supplies, and support in centralized locations. But those efforts haven't prevented the encampments, such as the one where Jamil Atkins lived, from being cleared.
They keep telling they're gonna put us in certain places and they put us there. They tell them they're gonna do this for them, when that time comes, they don't do it. So I feel that we just been getting lied to by telling them they're gonna put us in apartments. Then they get put in the hotel, then they kick us out of them. After they put us in, they kick us out of them because they say we either selling drugs in these hotels or something, and we don't be doing none of that. We don't do none of that. Then they put in the room got bed bugs in. They put in the hotel, they got bed bugs in them, and it's nasty. The hotel rooms are nasty. It's bugs all over. I found I stayed in a hotel room, a motel, where there's bed bugs all over the pillows and mattresses. And I reported I told the landlord he ain't gonna move me to another room, and at the same thing's another room, bed bugs. The phone didn't work. None of that. I tried to tell him. He just didn't care. Next day, I ended up getting put out. Next day. So I don't know what I'm gonna do now. I don't know.
As layoffs and furloughs continue through the coronavirus-induced recession and eviction moratoriums are being lifted, the U.S. is facing a major housing crisis. And in St. Louis, people have been holding rallies and occupying City Hall to call for a moratorium on evictions for tenants and unhoused people alike, and framing this demand as a racial equity issue. So in this episode, we trace the story of two tent encampments, one occupied by people who are unhoused under an overpass, and one occupied by activists and advocates at St. Louis City Hall. And we hear from the executive director and community engagement specialist of a fair housing enforcement agency about what racial equity means during a housing crisis. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here. We met Jamil on the last day of June at a tent encampment in downtown St. Louis under the I-70 and I-44 overpasses near Laclede's Landing and the Lumiere Casino.
Well, I'm here because I have nowhere else to go, and because I have no other relatives down here. Well, I got brothers, but I can't stay. I've been on the street with my mom since I was 15, and since I've been on the street, I've been getting harassed by certain police officers. They've been locking me up for petty stuff, the stuff that they can just they don't even have to lock people up for, like holding signs. We ain't out, like I said, we ain't out here committing robbery. We ain't out here robbing, putting no guns to people. We ain't out here making people I ain't out here making people give it to me because they want to give it to me. I can't make them give me nothing. I'm out here trying to survive, so I'm doing trying to survive. I'm not here, I help you. I try to help you when I can. I do what I can. I just do whatever the best I can, even though in my situation.
His effort to survive was about to get even harder because city officials were planning to sweep the encampment he called home. And every time he's displaced, he's concerned about what will happen to his possessions. Most of the time, he says, they go missing, which is why ensuring that they end up in safe hands is a top priority. Since the pandemic, he's been even more concerned about keeping himself safe from COVID-19.
I ain't never been sick in my life. The part I ever been sick is cold. But other than that, I ain't never had no kind of disease. I ain't never had this virus, nothing. I don't have, But I try to try to avoid stuff like that to keep from getting sick. So I try to take care of myself.
Living downtown keeps him close to service providers and at a centralized location where outreach volunteers distribute supplies.
I'm going to take showers, like that, things of that nature. Try to keep hand sanitizer out. So if I touch something, I can always put hand sanitize my hands so I won't keep them from catching something or wear gloves.
But living outside also subjects him to the stares of people passing by and the judgment of those who consider his existence an inconvenience.
Well, they look at us like we are, they look at us like we animals. That's how they look at us because we outside. They think we like animals in the zoo. But we're not. We're human. We got feelings like everybody got feelings. We're human. We got things. We got issues that we're dealing with. And then by people saying stuff, it ain't helping. It's only making our problem worse than what it is. It ain't what it ain't got to be. I try. If you can't say nothing positive to a person, don't say nothing at all. Just because we all out here trying to do what's right. We ain't out here trying to put the next person down or belittle or talk bad about the next person. We trying to help each other. That's what we doing.
Helping each other is a crucial part of survival for Jamil and others who are unhoused in the city of St. Louis, which spends close to 6% of its budget on health and welfare, and around 44% of its budget on public safety, with the lion's share of the public safety budget going to police. This is a major sticking point for outreach volunteers like Lisa Winter, who introduced us to Jamil and has advocated for people who are unhoused since she moved to St. Louis 5 years ago.
I'm down here under the I-70 overpass by Lumiere where there's 2 homeless encampments. And about 3 days ago, they put up eviction notices saying that they were going to evict these encampments at 9 a.m. this morning in the middle of pandemic. So we have gathered 25 people have come down to not only witness this, but hold the city accountable and to try to prevent these evictions or to demand that the city actually place people in housing.
Among those who gathered in an attempt to prevent the evictions were outreach volunteers, tenants' rights advocates, community development professionals, renters, and people who have been involved in the Uprising for Black Lives.
So right now it's really pretty quiet. I'm not sure exactly. It's probably about 10 o'clock, so we've been here about 4 hours. In the last 45 minutes, we've seen Health and Human Resources van that's driven by multiple times. We've seen a few police cars and a truck from the fire department, not a fire truck, but a truck from the fire department. And it is my belief, and some of the other folks that are down here, that what they're doing is they're scouting out because they don't want to they're scouting and watching for how much support is down here. And because historically, they don't want to do it while people are watching because what they're doing is unconscionable and they don't want to be confronted on that. And I was just talking to one of the residents down here a couple minutes ago, and what she's really afraid of, because we're like, how long do we stay? Can we get people to show up tomorrow? How long can we protect these 2 encampments? And she's like, what I'm afraid of is that they're just watching for you guys to leave, and then they're going to swoop in and clear us out, and nobody will even know what happened, because that's historically what the city has done.
Lisa says that a month ago, she was at Market Street near St. Louis City Hall when she witnessed the same pattern of watchful waiting, followed by evictions when numbers of advocates at the encampment dwindled. And she's troubled by how the evictions ultimately leave those who are unhoused in the same precarious position as they were before.
There's a young person down here now that has had a housing voucher from the city since last October and still has not been placed in housing. There are people here right this minute that were, when they evacuated Market Street, they moved them to a hotel, and they have already canceled that contract, and those people are already back here on the street, and they're sleeping under the bridge up this way here.
She's a proponent of Housing First, an approach to addressing homelessness by providing permanent housing to people experiencing homelessness, without requiring them to participate in services, behavioral health programs, or address other issues in order to obtain or retain housing.
I do know that, in my experience from helping get some folks in housing, they do need more support to start with because that's a big transition. So they need people that can help them get like driver's license and the IDs you need. They need people to help them get to doctor's appointments so they can get their health back. They need people to make sure that they remember to get groceries this week. They need support for the first bit, but after that, a lot of these people are really successful once they can get housed and once they can get stable. It's just we think that if we can just ignore this problem, it can go away, or if we can just stick them somewhere, that they'll go away. And this could be me, this could be you, this could be my son or daughter, and it just really is frustrating.
According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, there is large and growing evidence demonstrating that housing first helps people exit homelessness quickly and increases the likelihood that a person will remain housed after a year. People who participate in housing first programs report increased levels of autonomy, choice, and control. And when they choose to participate in optional support services, they tend to make choices around education, employment, health, and interpersonal interactions that promote stable housing in the long term.
It's about 57 cents out of every dollar goes to arresting and incarcerating folks here. Could you imagine if we were able to even use a portion of that to put these folks into housing and to get them support until they can get on their feet? And if we can use that to resource people for utilities and housing so that they don't become, before they end up on the street, they wouldn't have to worry about policing this area and clearing it out. They would have residents that were able to be housed and be able to be part of the community. It is impossible to do normal, everyday things when all you're doing is trying to figure out where are you going to sleep that night and how are you going to actually have a meal that day. It's impossible to do anything else. It's impossible to get a job. It's impossible to do other things. Even though I would like to point out that I would guess that at least half of these people down here actually are employed.
Lisa adds that even though no one is technically jailed for being poor or unhoused, the emphasis on policing in jails creates a cycle of arrest and incarceration.
So what happens is you get a trespassing charge, you get a drunk and disorderly, they'll get a ticket for flying a sign or requesting funds. And then at that point they get a ticket. I was in the library a couple months ago before COVID, and they ran a person out of the library that was unhoused. They had him handcuffed on the front steps of the library. They gave him a ticket. He kept telling them, I am unhoused. I'm homeless. I can't pay this ticket. What is this gonna do? And the guy's like, that's your problem, not my problem. So then what happens is the next time that they come and they interact with that person, they run their name and they see that they have a warrant because they weren't able to pay the ticket for a trespassing or flying a sign, and then they end up incarcerated. And that cycle just keeps repeating itself.
Instead of criminalizing people who are unhoused, Lisa suggests that city officials invest in communities impacted by poverty well before people end up on the street.
Right now they're working on the budget for the upcoming year, the fiscal year, and look at what they're prioritizing. Things like privatizing the airport, funding for the police, and it's like those resources need to go to keep people from ending up houseless, to keep people from ending up being not able to have jobs, not able to be successful in our city.
Lisa doesn't just see housing as a matter of income inequality. She's wearing a hat with the words Black Lives Matter on it. And like many of her fellow activists and advocates who spent their Tuesday morning under an overpass in downtown St. Louis, she views the right to safe and secure housing as a racial equity issue.
A large proportion of the folks that are down here are Black. A lot of them have served in the military. So I think this is just where the racial disparity, the lack of access to resources and stuff, this is where it spreads out around the edges and it becomes more and more invisible. A lot of Black trans folks are down here living on the streets, not in these encampments, but in other encampments. I'm really frustrated. Because I'm really frustrated. The other part is that it's also beautiful. Look at the people who came down at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday with like 12-hour notice to be down here. When I'm looking at these faces, they're showing up over and over and over again. And that gives me hope, and that makes me feel like I got to get my ass out of bed and show up. But I'm looking forward to being down here and just hanging out with these folks and having a donut and having a coffee without worrying about whether the police are going to show up to evict them.
The next day, Police vehicles and trucks from the Missouri Department of Transportation circled the tent encampment where Jamil was staying. Eventually, a Missouri Department of Transportation bulldozer began clearing a pile of trash and belongings as residents of the encampment and their advocates watched. Individual workers, equipped with trash bags, a pitchfork, and a shovel, removed what remained. Nearby, a flyer underneath a stop sign read, "Homeless people have hopes, dreams, families, and needs." In St. Louis, organizers are connecting the Uprising for Black Lives with the fight for safe and secure housing for people who are unhoused and people who are facing housing insecurity as a result of the pandemic. On July 8th, people who have been rising up for Black lives, queer rights, and the rights of people who are unhoused started a tent encampment in front of St. Louis City Hall. In the first days of the occupation, artists and activists hoisted large banners and secured them to City Hall gates, declaring in all caps, "Protect our unhoused family," "Defund police," and "Invest in community." The largest banner spelled out in red letters, "Resign Lida," a demand that has gained steam ever since St. Louis City Mayor Lida Krewson read the names and addresses of people who signed comment cards in favor of defunding the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department over Facebook Live. Organizers of the occupation at St. Louis City Hall, such as Kalia Edwards, have also sharply criticized Mayor Krewson for her administration's approach to homelessness.
I'm here to, of course, demand the resignation of Lida Krewson, but also to amplify voices of those who this administration and all administrations before this one, voices of those folks who are unheard by the government, by this political system, by white supremacy, and just systemic oppression in general. I'm also here to amplify the voices of the ones who are most vulnerable among us. That's our unhoused community as well. I'm here because I'm tired of watching and waiting and supporting. I'm ready to move past that and demand change because I'm over it.
The Occupy City Hall St. Louis tent encampment, which was located near a tent encampment occupied by people who are unhoused, is one way that activists called attention to the evictions of unhoused people during the pandemic. Noise protests at Mayor Krewson's home and social media posts are another way. As of July 24th, activists have kept track of encampment evictions at 4 locations, including the 2 camps under the I-70 overpass, which we visited at the top of the show. And they've experienced evictions of their encampment at City Hall too, along with arrests. Today, St. Louis City Hall is barricaded to prevent the occupation of City Hall grounds, so the organizers have moved their activities, such as screen printing Resign Lida t-shirts and playing games of Uno to pass the time, to the sidewalk in front of City Hall. We reached out to Mayor Lida Krewson's office and the St. Louis District of the Missouri Department of Transportation for comment about the evictions under the I-70 overpass. We haven't received a response yet, but we'll let you know if we get any updates. In the meantime, we'll hear from the Executive Director and Community Engagement Specialist of a Fair Housing Enforcement Agency about what racial equity means during a housing crisis.
Hey everyone, it's Lauren. We wanted to learn about the impact of the housing crisis on working class people and what it means for racial equity. So on July 23rd, we spoke to Will Jordan, Executive Director for the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing and Opportunity Council, a local fair housing enforcement agency.
What we know is that this is going to disproportionately affect African American women in particular in the city of St. Louis because they represent such a huge bulk of the persons who are living in rental housing and low-income persons in the city of St. Louis and in St. Louis County. And so because of that, we know that whatever policies and whatever decisions that we come up with are going to disproportionately affect the long-term stability of each one of those households, knowing that more than half of them are going to be represented by African Americans in the city of St. Louis in particular. And many other cities are similarly situated here in America.
Will reminded us that America prioritizes property owners who have far more legal rights than tenants who have almost no protections.
When there's a shift, when there's new development happening, one of the things that they're not trying to do is increase the amount of low-income rental housing. What they're trying to do is increase, single-family homes and whatnot. And so people who are living in rental housing always are going to be the ones that are most drastically affected by any changes, both positive and negative, in the community.
Glenn Burley, Community Engagement Specialist for the Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing and Opportunity Council, explained how the 2008 housing crisis emphasizes the need for a racial equity approach this time around.
When the last housing crisis happened, what did we see? We saw a massive drop in home ownership in communities of color, especially Black and Latino communities. And what happened afterwards was the credit market shut down in these neighborhoods in a way that didn't happen before. So it's hard to get a mortgage in North City now than it was for folks' grandparents. And so what does that do? It does what Will says. You have a whole bunch of people that used to be homeowners, right, before the 2008 crash. They are now renters, right, for the most part, because their credit got so damaged and stuff in the last round based on those predatory loans, right? So the same people that got hurt last time are now in front of the bus again to get hit again this time. It is those, families that have already been living on the edge.
Making things worse, the families who are already living on the edge often have to pay more for housing than they can afford.
About 1 in 4 Black families in the city of St. Louis is extremely housing cost burden, which means that over half of that household's monthly income just goes to housing. Just housing, nothing else, right? And the federal government says you're supposed to get, you only spend about a third, right? So you have a whole bunch of folks that are already living on the edge.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, this happens. So, even if your hours just got cut, right? So even if your job still exists, but your hours just got cut and you were already living on that edge, spending so much, guess who can't pay rent? You, right? Even though you didn't lose your job, right? If you are a server, right? Or a bartender right now, even if you are making some money working at the restaurant doing takeout orders or something like that, chances are your income is taking a major hit, even if you're still employed, right? And, and so when we look at the industries that have been hit hardest, as service industries, as pink collar jobs, quote unquote, these jobs are disproportionately filled with people of color, especially Black women, as Will points out. So I just want to point out sort of like how that last housing crash, set up a whole bunch of people to now be hurt again in this one.
Will and Glenn agree that the wave of evictions to come will be unlike any other in living memory. This is a major problem because an eviction doesn't just make someone housing insecure in the short term, it also affects a person's ability to get approved for housing in the future.
This is huge. So much follows a tenant, right? So the actual eviction, a real eviction on the record, is just like having a felony, violent felony on your history. And it follows you the same way. Once you have that eviction on your record, now certain levels of housing, once you get back on your feet, are not going to be made available to you. These tenant screening programs have gotten more and more sophisticated and intrusive. And people use them. And so one of the things that's not going to happen is you're not going to be able to get into the safe, affordable, on the bus line, close to a good school district kind of housing that would make it better for you and your family and your children ever again, right? Unless you win the lottery or, we hit it big and you buy a house or something like that. But outside of that, you're hoping and praying because that's it.
But Will says that the threat of an eviction alone can create trouble for a tenant.
Many tenant screening programs treat that as the same as an eviction. right? Just like when you call the police, right? You think, well, this house got a lot of police calls on it, right? So whether there's an arrest or something happens doesn't make any difference. When the police come to the house, they're looking at a little screen that says, "Oh, we came here like 7 times, and every time something bad happened." So they walk in the door with a bad attitude. Same with tenant screening programs, right? There's not a legal eviction out there, but the fact is that they know what's been happening, and so they use the fact that you were threatened to be evicted to treat you the same way they would as if you had been evicted.
Even though redlining is technically illegal, Glenn explains that tenant screening services can result in more segregation.
You have huge sections of town now that virtually all landlords use pretty, advanced screening services. And what that will do, again, if we stack these things, right? If we stack all the things that are happening, if we know that African Americans, especially African American women, are most likely to be losing jobs or hours right now, if we know that that's then going to stack onto not being able to pay rent, and if we know that then that's going to stack onto turning into an eviction filing, then what that means is a whole bunch of people are, like Will said, going to lose access to living in whole neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And that means that our already hyper-segregated metropolitan area could come out as even more segregated long-term unless we do something to stop this.
And Will suggests that if nothing is done, we'll see a rise in civil unrest as more and more people get fed up with growing inequality across race and class.
I mean, there's just too many studies about what happens, about people, what people think about people living in segregated areas. And what people think about themselves when they have to live in a segregated area? When you combine all this, plus all of the protests and the police brutality and the things that are going on, I'll be honest with you. How many young people you think are going to be affected by this wave of evictions that's about to hit? How long do you think it's going to take for the crowds to go from 2 and 3 or 500 or 1,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 to 100,000? What's the disincentive?
Although there's no solution that will fix racism and classism in this country overnight, there are ways to address the housing crisis immediately. Sheriffs can decide not to serve eviction notices, and judges can decide to pause eviction proceedings. On March 20th, a St. Louis Circuit Court judge issued an order to stop residential evictions in St. Louis County, which has not been lifted. Then, on March 23rd, the Missouri Supreme Court paused all in-person court proceedings to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and paused eviction proceedings too. But St. Louis City courts resumed court proceedings in the beginning of July, the same month that the St. Louis City Sheriff began serving eviction notices issued before March 23rd.
Well, the Missouri courts will have to make a decision and say, hey, we're not going to facilitate that until maybe the federal government comes up with a plan to help us deal with this emergency, just like a hurricane, just like an earthquake. And so, and that's what's going to happen. The courts have already stepped in. We see that they're about to lift the moratorium on evictions right now. And if they do, it's literally like a tsunami. It's going to wash over the city. And you're going to start seeing overcrowding in a way you've never seen it before. If you think there's people standing on the streets at every corner with a sign says, I need help, I'm telling you, they do need help, and they're gonna be doubling up, tripling up on those corners, as well as in the neighborhoods where they do have friends and family. And you talk about overcrowding, you ain't seen overcrowding yet. You haven't. It is going to be unbelievable. Because where are they gonna go? Where are they gonna go?
Housing advocates spoke up, asking the director of the St. Louis City Department of Health to declare evictions a housing crisis, requesting that the St. Louis City Sheriff freeze evictions on behalf of tenants, and holding housing rallies to demand a 120-day moratorium on evictions. Then, on August 4th, a St. Louis Circuit Court judge issued an order to stop residential evictions in St. Louis City until September, on the basis that evictions are a public health emergency, especially when COVID-19 cases are rising in the St. Louis region. In the meanwhile, record numbers of people are applying for rental assistance in St. Louis City and County.
And I believe that there's over 2,000 people on the rolls to ask for assistance, and that's without us even advertising that it's available. So it's going to be unprecedented.
Will notes that there is a cap on rental assistance, and depending on how much you pay for rent, it might not be enough, or you might not be able to pay utilities. And there continues to be uncertainty as the pandemic and the recession stretches on. So we asked Will what he would say to the region's leaders who are responsible for leading us through this crisis.
What makes our interaction with one another as humans good is that when we have a level of respect and love for life, not just loving your kids, but loving somebody else's kids too. And everybody that's standing out, that's participating in the Occupy and the protest, there's a reason why. What's going on is there was already a lack, a major lack, and nobody's paying attention. So right now, people need to look into their hearts and understand that if there's a such thing as compassion coming from people, we need to draw upon it right now. Don't do it for the vote. Do it for the love of people. Do it for the love of people. Do you love people? Do you love anybody? Do you love anybody? And can they receive this? Because if you don't have any love, then I think you shouldn't even be in office, because you can't help us. Your policies can't help us, right? If it's not based on love. The way that you are apportioning resources based upon votes, not on love, can't help. It's gonna make it worse. So don't think about the votes. We got to look and understand that the people who are suffering are not going to just go away. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, it's going to affect you, but don't do it out of fear because they might come and get you. Do it out of love because they have a need. They have a great need. The mission that we have hasn't changed. The phones haven't stopped ringing. The people have real needs. And the ones that reach us, a lot of times there is something we can do for them. Sometimes it's on the spectrum of being able to give them more of a peace of mind. Sometimes it's actually being able to help them stay in the house. Sometimes it's actually make them feel like justice is served because we're able to do something for them that proves that our Constitution is real, right? To enforce the law on their behalf, right? And so we have a continuum of help that we can still give in the midst of this crisis. When I saw that us as a staff and as a mission, we still give people hope, then I'm staying on the wall. Yeah, that's the best way I can describe it, is that, at first I was just thinking about myself, but when I started looking at other people, I'm like, nah, this is not just about me. I can't just run from pillar to post because I'm afraid I'm gonna die of COVID, right? I gotta keep on the wall and help because I can.
This show is produced by me, Lauren Brown, and lead producer Jalianne Yang. From St. Louis Public Radio and PRX, this is We Live Here.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
From PRX.